They were just positive in general. Yeah, sorry.
All right, cool.
So Lydia, did you want to give some feedback on behalf of Patrick?
Yeah, sorry, Patrick's had to leave, but he forwarded me his feedback from general interest societies. It's not extensive, but I promised him I'd read it out. He says, in general, the consensus was that this seems like a good idea, but lots of the societies found it hard to see how they will implement this. But since this is about the merits of the idea instead of the hows, if that makes sense, we can kind of, there's almost not much to respond to that.
So I don't know, because we should focus on the results in it, and how we will benefit as a union. So I don't know if I should respond, but I think it's quite clear, the idea.
Yeah, I would. This is about the merits of the idea. Sorry, Izzy, I'm talking beyond how we would do it.
So we've got some feedback from Alex. Should LUU balance freedom of speech and expressing opinions with unfair bashing of a candidate? How would LUU balance freedom of speech? Adam, I don't know if you have any response.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think this is a really good, this is a really, again, it's just about freedom of speech as well as protecting people from smears. And I think it's really easy, I think I don't think that societies necessarily have a huge role to play in LU elections apart from endorsing a candidate. I don't see a society as a platform to be, actively encouraging people to vote one way or another, except for endorsing candidates, which is obviously very important. And that's what we would encourage, which is a positive way of, participating in an election. However, it should also, as we have seen in the last election, it had also some really negative results, which is when it's done in a wrong way. And I think it's quite well outlined in the idea. But definitely, we should not be getting ourselves into a situation where DLE dictates everything that's happening. This is, I think, very specific in terms of the election itself.
So Safian, did you want to say something on behalf of the Libcos?
Yeah. So just on the point that politics is politics, and perhaps not having a protection for smear campaigns might be more representative of real democratic procedures. I'd also like to say LUU also have a duty to protect students, and more often than not with these smear campaigns, you see it's students of colour, particularly women of colour and Muslim students, that are disproportionately targeted. And so I think it is important to have some sort of transparency and protection system to prevent these students from being disproportionately targeted.
So we've got some feedback from Alex, which is similar to what Sarah said on behalf of the dance societies about kind of mirroring real politics.
I think what Safian just said about also the responsibility of, and I think this is really also what it comes down to, is the number one responsibility of the political engagement team and of the exec and of everyone who's taking part in the election is to protect the candidates, because as I said before, it's not an easy thing and people on this panel or people who are participating in this meeting will, definitely agree with me that it's not an easy thing to put yourself forward in the election. And I think people should be protected when they do this. And I don't think that, this should be an opportunity for someone else to smear you. And I just agree with Safian on everyone that he said. And I do understand the concerns with freedom of speech, but I do think that there is a responsibility to protect our candidates and our students in general and their mental health and their participation and their democratic rights. And I think that outweighs this, let's say, setback.
Lauren, did you want to?
Sorry, I wasn't ready to come in then. I am now. Yeah, I'll be really quick because I realised we're running, we've been talking about this one for a while, but it was just to point out that every year after Lead LUU, our political engagement team write up a report and take suggestions from how Lead LUU has gone to our Audit and Risk Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of our Board of Trustees, for suggestions of how to improve it for next year. And some of the suggestions that Adam has made in his idea are ones that have been written into that report, so they will still be going to our Audit and Risk Committee, and they are things that we're already considering. So specifically, that is about how we work with societies to encourage positive campaigning, and actually making sure that the rules are clearer to our members and easier to understand. So I just wanted to point out that that is something that will still happen, regardless of what happens in the voting today.
Great, so we're running out of time on that idea. So could I just check with the panel that you guys feel like you're happy to vote? Great, so we'll vote on that one and then we'll come back and we've got the results from all of the ideas. So if the panelists could just give me a little message to let me know that you're back, just so I can make sure that we've got everyone here before we get started again. So we should just have 2 more panelists to go. Amazing. Okay, so now we're moving on to the Better University ideas. We've got quite a few to get through here, so we'll just really try and keep them all to time. So yeah, we'll hand over to Abia first for her update on what she's been up to since the last set of forums.
Thanks, Izzy. Hi, everyone. Really conscious of time, so I'll be super quick. As you all can probably imagine, a lot of my time recently has been spent trying to make sure that everyone's education is still up to scratch and that your assessment plans, lectures, online teaching, all the rest of it is still, at a good standard and you're getting the best experience, especially during a really difficult time. So that has included working really closely with the amazing school reps on things like assessment plan changes, learning, moving online, and of course the safety net and no detriment policy, which is now in place for all finalists and is being worked on for second year students right now. Also working on things like year abroad and what happens to students who want to go on a placement and things like that. So busy, but obviously if you have any questions, you can always drop me a line and I'm more than happy to chat to everyone. But yeah, hope you're all doing really well at the moment.
Amazing, thank you. So I'll hand over to Chloe for her update now.
Hello everyone. During the lockdown, I've been working on a paid work experience project for disabled students. We got some funding to put towards a diversity activity, and this is what I've been working on. And being in lockdown has meant that I've actually been able to connect with more people through LinkedIn than I perhaps would have if we were in a building. So I'm excited that the funding that was supposed to be used this year will be added on to next year, so we'll be able to launch the project in a bigger way. And I've also been working with the Equality Policy Unit and the Equality and Inclusion Delivery Group to shift focus on some of the projects that we were working on and how they now apply during lockdown and this new way of teaching and learning. So looking at access to these, making sure that students who are expecting to come are still able to do so if they'd like to, how induction will look, the curriculum, how students will progress, how you'll progress, and still working on awarding gaps. and that alongside recruiting new liberation coordinators for the year 2020-2021. So it's been very busy on my end.
Amazing, thank you so much. So yeah, just a reminder for everyone, we're going to aim to stick to about 10 minutes per idea. So that gives each idea holder a maximum of 3 minutes to present their idea. So now I'll hand over to Lauren with the first idea. Should the university do more to support students who haven't come through the A-level route?
So this idea is something that I've brought up because I have been doing some work with the Student Success Programme on BTEC students that come to Leeds and their progression, as I was a BTEC student, and it just got me thinking that actually the support that's needed for those students might be similar support that's needed for other students who haven't come through an A-level route. I know that when I came to university back in 2013, everyone kept talking about A-levels all the time, and it did not help me feeling like I was fitting in or like I should be at uni, and I didn't ever feel that there was any targeted support for me because I hadn't come through that route. Because I've been doing some of that work, there's been some research that's taken place by a lecturer at our School of Law about BTEC students there and their attainment, and basically the suggestion at the end of his research report is that there isn't any lack of ability in those students at all. It isn't a skills deficit. So if you've not come through an A-level route, you may have been taught in a very different way. So I can say that BTEC programs are a much more vocational route. So I didn't necessarily have the academic writing skills, the critical thinking skills, but I ended up with a first-class degree and did a master's. So it wasn't that the ability wasn't there. People choose to do different courses other than A-levels for many different reasons, and I think sometimes we presume it's because they don't have the capability of doing a degree at a Russell Group university, but that is not the case at all. They just need some more support. And actually Richard Peake, who did this research, implemented a toolkit at the School of Law, which was just some targeted things to help those students to transition into things like academic writing, and he saw all of them managed to get 2-1s or above, which was a huge improvement. So some of this work is already happening through the Student Success Programme, and I just really wanted to be able to leave a policy as a bit of a legacy piece before I finish as an officer here, because it's something that's really important to me that those students feel just as welcome at Leeds as everybody else.
Amazing, thank you, Lauren. So do we have any initial questions from the panel? Just give people a chance to type. So if I could just ask the school reps to give us a thumbs up from the little reactions function at the bottom of your screen, those that were generally in favour of the idea, and then if you could just use the chat box to let me know if you had any particular comments to kind of add to what Lauren said, or if there was anything perhaps not in support of the idea. I'll just wait for everyone to type if they do have any feedback. So we've got a question, Lauren. In what way would the university be supporting such students?
So I've left the idea quite open so that this can be something that's worked on with whichever officer will take it on next year. I imagine education officer, but it would probably be in something like targeting support for those students, making sure that personal tutors know the routes that their students have come through, because that's surprisingly not a thing that personal tutors even know, and just making sure that those things are available to those students and pushed to those students, not by singling them out as needing extra support, but to make sure that they're aware of it if they do need it. And also I think that there's a lot of work to be done around just acknowledging what a diverse range of students we have. Like we have, I think, nearly 28% of our student body is international. They've been through a completely different education route, and actually the support they need is going to be very different to the support that a home A-level student might need. And something I meant to mention before is, I did a load of research and I didn't mention any of it, but dropout rates for those who haven't gone through the A-level route are especially high, and actually those who've come through a BTEC route have been as high as 35% dropout from their degree, which is really, really sad to see. And it continues to be the highest dropout rate out of any of the groups that they measure dropout rates on, which is really sad.
So we've got another question. Would mature students be included in this?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who has not come through that route. And again, I wouldn't imagine that the support, the university don't tend to create support that is only for a certain group of students. They won't say you can only access this if you haven't done an A-level, come through an A-level route. So I imagine it'll be available to everyone, but targeted at those groups who might not have come through that, because we have the whole lifelong learning centre, a huge amount of people who are coming to education who may not even have their GCSEs, so going through access courses, doing foundation degrees. There's a huge range of routes that people can take, so I imagine it to include all of those.
Just worth noting on both of those pieces of feedback as well, that they're kind of a little bit more logistical, so we're kind of thinking not necessarily about the details but just the general merits of kind of Lauren's concept as a whole. So if the panel are ready to vote, then I think we'll go to the vote on this idea. Great, so if you're ready, I'll just hand over to Saskia, who's presenting our next idea. Should the university do more to alleviate student stress around exams and coursework?
Okay, so my idea is all about reducing stress around exams and coursework. It's often the case that we'll have like multiple deadline clashes within like the same week. So I thought it doesn't really need to happen. And if the university schools talked with each other and actually internally as well, they could work to reduce the amount of clashing of deadlines within the same week. By reducing the clashing, we'll have better quality of work, and it will just be more enjoyable to be doing assignments because we won't be so worried about the time that we spend doing it. And around exams, so we come back from Christmas holidays having revised all Christmas, and then we have 2 weeks of exams, and then after we're expected to go straight back into university lectures. And I just think it's a bit of an overload. So I know that Bath University implemented a week break after the exams to let students like rejuvenate after this stressful period, and I think that the university could offer this to the students. Thank you.
Great, so do we have any initial questions for Saskia from the panel? Just give people an opportunity to type. Okay, so as before, if I could just have some general reactions from the school reps, those that generally were in favour of the idea. So we got some feedback from Mel, who says in her school, course reps are in charge to check there are no deadline clashes. I feel that might be kind of more of a process, kind of logistical feedback in terms of how this would be implemented. We're kind of just focusing on the idea itself. Alex says, I think this is especially important for joint honours students where there's absolutely no communication between schools about deadlines. So is there any more feedback? Would this mean that the end of term would be shifted back a week? So would there be shorter Easter or summer break? Again, I feel that might more be kind of like a logistical thing that would be looked at. We're kind of more trying to think about the positive kind of best case scenario of the idea. I don't know if Saskia, you kind of wanted to add anything.
I didn't really know where it would be taken from or the length of time. I was just thinking some period where we don't have to be forced straight back into lectures after exams would be good.
So do we have any more questions from the panel? Do you guys feel like you're ready to vote? Amazing, so we'll go to the vote for that one. So we've got 12 votes in favour, so this idea will pass. And 9 votes in favour of Lauren's idea, so that one will go to referendum. Okay, so now I'm going to pass over to Amy for our third idea. Should the university sign up to the Student Minds University's Mental Health Charter?
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. So this idea is about getting the university to sign up to Student Minds' new university's mental health charter. Signing up to the charter basically just kind of means that they're committing to adopting a whole university approach in tackling the student mental health crisis. And it makes best practice recommendations in many areas, like the transition to uni, learning, teaching and assessment, support services. Obviously combating waiting times is the most important thing, in my opinion, at the moment. It makes recommendations on staff wellbeing, because we all know that staff wellbeing is paramount to student wellbeing. It has stuff on student voice, inclusivity and intersectionality, and physical settings like residences where you need to be considering student mental health in their design. So I believe that signing up to the charter would be a way to keep to hold the university to account, essentially, for developments that they've already sort of promised us in terms of developing the counselling service and meeting that need by resourcing it better. So I think that it would be a good thing to do to hold them accountable, but it would need further work as well, because there are areas that aren't addressed as much as we would like. So for example, culturally competent care, we need a kind of stronger guidance on that, and luckily we're doing a research project at the moment that's got a lot of rich data back on those objects, so we can supplement it with Leeds specific kind of stuff on mental health, but it will just provide that sector approved overview and framework for the whole university approach. Thanks.
Amazing. So do we have any initial questions from the panel for Amy? And then if I could just invite the school reps to give a reaction, those that were generally in favour of the idea, or if you had any particular responses from your schools. Lots of thumbs up popping up. So if we don't have any questions from the panel, are you guys ready to vote? Great, so we'll go to voting on that idea. So this was a complete consensus in favour of the idea, so that will become policy. Great, so I'm now going to hand over to Safyan for our next idea. Should we implement a body dedicated to research into decolonization?
Okay, so this idea is basically about addressing the racial disparities that Black and minority ethnic students face. Decolonization, to put it really simply, and this is putting it really simply, is about dismantling these barriers and looking at where the university can do better in addressing them. So just to give you some statistics, the BAME awarding gap shows that Black and minority ethnic students are over 10% less likely to come out of university with a 2-1 or a first, and twice as likely to drop out of university than their white counterparts. Black students face their largest disparities, with 26% less likely to be awarded a 2-1 or a first, and fewer than only 1% of the UK's lecturers being Black. Research by the Runnymede Trust, the National Union of Students, and Class think tank has shown that the lack of culturally sensitive mental health services, a lack of representative curriculums, and are two key factors that contribute to the BAME attainment gap and create a lot of disengagement and isolation for BAME students. So I think implementing this would be really important for the university to level the playing field for students in all of their diversity. The way it would work, it would involve one full-time paid member of staff who would coordinate with a group of part-time paid students to produce a wide-scale review on how the university can go further to decolonize by documenting things like the lack of access for BAME students, the unconscious biases they face, the microaggressions they experience, the disproportionate policing of Black and minority ethnic students, and particularly Muslim students, and also the significant lack of BAME representation at the senior leadership and professional level. A precedent has been set by this. So the University of Warwick have implemented the decolonising project, UCL have done it, Durham Uni have done it, Leicester have done it, and even University of Keele have done it, and that's just naming a few. And the way it would practically work is that each student would take the lead on a different research area. So one may focus on diversifying the curriculum, another may look at the university's mental health services and making them more accessible to ethnic minority students. And another might look at the university's relationships with businesses and companies complicit in the climate crisis and oppression in the global south. This information would then be collated in a comprehensive report, which would be sent to the university and would lay the groundwork for further campaigning and lobbying dedicated to the issues that it brought to light. And yeah, another priority would be amplifying the Why Is My Curriculum White movement beyond the union and into the wider campus, just to basically address the lack of diversity in our reading lists and our curriculum content, and making sure that the campaign is active and engaging throughout the year. Cool.
Amazing. So if I could just ask the panel if you guys have got any initial questions for Safyan. And again, if I could just invite some feedback from the reps. So if you just want to react, if your school was generally in favour of the idea, and then you can put forward any feedback in the chat. So we've got lots of positive reactions. Have we got any questions from the panel or anything you wanted to add, Safyan?
No. Yeah, I think there was some, when I was looking into planning it, there was some disagreement about whether the students who partake in it should be paid. But the argument I would make for that is the work that they'd be doing. You know, researching your own oppression is quite an emotionally taxing thing. And I think a lot of universities are making steps towards ending this culture of not paying students to do a lot of this really difficult work. So yeah, the argument I would say is that students definitely need to be paid for the work they put into it.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, panel, are you ready to vote? Great. So we'll move to voting on this idea. So we've got 85% in favour, so that idea will pass and become policy. Okay, so now I'm going to pass to Bethany with our next idea. Should the LUU lobby the university to work towards reducing carbon emissions from academics' flights?
Sure. So members of staff and postgraduate researchers at the university, usually outside of these abnormal times, can do quite a lot of travel as part of their work. That might be for things like field work or to attend conferences or to collaborate on projects. But obviously, all of that long distance travel can be associated with a really big carbon footprint. So it would be really great for the university to work towards actually kind of holding themselves accountable for the size of that carbon footprint and actively working towards reducing it. So when I spoke to the sustainability service about this idea, they said that there's already movements towards this, but it would really help if the student body actually said that they supported it and that it might actually increase the scale of the ideas that actually get put into force.
Great, so if I could pass over to the panel, if you guys have any initial questions for Bethany. And again, if I could just invite some feedback from the reps. So if you could do a show of reactions, those that were generally in favour of the idea, or let me know if you had any particular feedback to add to Bethany's argument. Samuel says, I'm a PGR and would be upset if I couldn't go to a conference because it was deemed too far.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the idea behind this would never be to stop people from traveling. It would be to introduce ideas such as considering different travel options and allowing people to perhaps choose a travel option with a lower carbon footprint rather than necessarily the cheapest option. But there's also a flip side to that in that, you know, some researchers can't travel, perhaps they might be responsible for caring for others, or they might have a disability. So actually we need to be thinking more broadly about making things like conferences more inclusive rather than meaning that people have to travel to those things.
So we've got some feedback from Alex, who says, I think this is especially relevant in COVID times as lecturers are being forced to collaborate online rather than in person anyway.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think lots of researchers will be finding alternatives right now that there's no reason why they can't use after the COVID crisis is over.
Great, so do we have any more feedback from the reps or any questions from the panelists? In which case, are the panel ready to vote? Great, thank you, Bethany. So we'll go to voting on this idea. So we've got a mixed response for this idea, so there's no majority either way. So it will go to a campus-wide referendum. So I'm now going to hand over to Amy for her update.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. So hi everyone, hope you're all well. Didn't actually say hi, but yeah, so I've been trying to stay connected with everything going on nationally because all of the problems that our students are facing tend to be replicated nationally. So a lot of work with the NUS on their lobbying for fair treatment during the pandemic and everything like that. We've been doing, I'm trying to read what I've actually written there. Oh, so I've also been doing a rent relief campaign as well that looks at lobbying councillors and MPs, and we've got lots of stuff set up for that. And then on a more local scale, like within the university, I've been working with the BHA on the no detriment stuff, working on the emergency hardship fund, looking after the community group as well on Facebook. I've been doing some work with Student Minds, who are our charity partners. And then in terms of non-COVID stuff, things have dropped off a little bit, but I'm still keeping going with my mental health research project. Just started recruiting for next year's Welfare Advisory Board, which is kind of like a group of reps for the welfare officer. And I'm hoping to leave some stuff behind in legacy. So I've triggered a piece of work on hidden course costs, and I'll hopefully be leaving something behind on drug harm reduction and sexual harassment, because those are the other things that were kind of on my manifesto. But yeah, if anybody is interested in anything that I'm up to, just send me an email or a message or whatever. But yeah, I hope you're all safe and well.
Thank you, Amy. So now I'm going to pass over to Seb, who's got our next idea. Should the University of Leeds formalise student participation in academic staff interview panels?
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, all right. As you can see here with the idea, it's pretty much straightforward, and there has been a couple of meetings and conversations about this beforehand. I went to see Tom Ward with Abia and Amy, and he was thrilled by the idea, especially due to the fact that this used to be practice at the University of Leeds, but in recent years there was a push to make these interview panels smaller. That is more for reasons of logistics and efficiency, rather than trying to get the students out of this. However, I would like to propose that UU lobbies the university to get back to the former practice in a formalized way, so that there that student representation at academic interview panels has to be mandatory in the future. I think that this would give LUU and of course the students much more influence and control on appointments, which I think is fair, because it's the students' tuition fees and stuff, and so there would be some lever basically to see where to what kind of appointments this money is going. And as well, I think it would be great experience for student representatives or members of the exec to partake in these kind of decisions. Thank you very much.
Amazing, thank you. So now if I could just ask the panel if you guys have got any initial questions. Okay, so I'll pass over to the reps. If you could just react to show those that were generally in favour of the idea, and give any feedback that you guys got from your schools. So we've got lots of positive reactions from the reps. Great, so if there's no more feedback, then panel, are you guys ready to vote? Perfect, so we'll go to voting on this idea. So there was 77% of votes in favour of this idea, so it will pass and become policy.
Thank you very much, guys. Yeah, stay safe.
So next I'm going to pass over to Melissa with her idea. Should LUU lobby the university to have installed hand sanitizer and additional hygiene products in key locations to improve the general student hygiene at the university?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Well, my idea is pretty straightforward. Following the increasing concerns on the COVID-19 spread, I thought it would be a good idea to make hygiene facilities more accessible in uni. And I think this could be done by having hand sanitizer always within the site. I think it's especially important in university because students and staff spend large percent of their days in there. And there are a lot of social areas like foyer, common break areas where it would be good to have accessible hand sanitizers installed. And hopefully this will encourage better hand hygiene. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mel. Do we have any initial questions from the panel? So if I could just invite the school reps to give us your feedback again in the same way. So we just see some thumbs up if you're in favour of the idea, or any particular comments or feedback that you received from your schools. So we've got lots of positive responses popping up. We've got a question about what other hygiene products you're talking about, so aside from the hand sanitizer.
Oh, sorry. For example, in laboratories, it would be good to have antibacterial wipes to clean keyboards and workspaces. And yeah, apart from that, we could have a discussion what other things could be added. It also would also be good to have posters reminding and encouraging hand hygiene.
So we've got some feedback from Monique that says we shouldn't promote hand sanitizer in bathrooms, hand washing is more effective.
Yeah, good point. I think it's just in general in areas where there's not a bathroom close. So for example, in the foyer in my school, bathrooms are not that necessarily close. And in the cafeteria as well. So it's good to have an alternative.
We've got a question, is this only temporary until the end of the epidemic?
I was thinking of it more to have it permanent, just in general to improve the hygiene in the university.
I think it's worth noting as well that if an idea passes, it then becomes policy for the next 3 years. So this would be something that would be kind of worked on more long term if it should pass. Do we have any more questions or feedback from the reps or the panel? Great, so panelists, are you guys ready to vote? So we'll move to voting on this idea. So we've got 85% of votes in favour of this idea, so it will pass. So I'm now going to pass over to Anna for her idea. Should LUU lobby the university to cut all ties with Barclays?
Hi everybody. So my motion is about putting pressure on the university to cut ties with Barclays until it stops financing fossil fuels. So as you might know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that we have 11 years left to limit catastrophic climate change. And then burning fossil fuels obviously is the primary cause of climate change. So the vast majority of fossil fuels must stay in the ground. And Barclays Bank is currently the biggest financer of fossil fuels in Europe. Between 2016 and 2019, it financed £85 billion into the fossil fuel industry, which is obviously a pretty staggering sum of money. So you may know that at the start of this academic year, the university divested the majority of its direct fossil fuel investments from companies such as Shell, BP and Total. So now what we need to do is look at our kind of secondary sponsorship of the fossil fuel industry and climate change. So looking towards the finance sector, and obviously Barclays being the biggest financer, we think this is like a good place to start. Yeah, as you may know, the university has a target of becoming net zero carbon by 2030. So this idea is kind of a suggestion for how to dismantle our connections to the fossil fuel industry. Yeah, at the moment, Barclays is the university's main banking provider, which is quite unfortunate because it means that our tuition fees are ultimately going towards funding the climate breakdown, which is obviously just not exactly beneficial to our futures. So yeah, a few sort of suggestions for how we would begin to cut ties with Barclays Bank. First of all, we would stop banking with Barclays, and then we would stop Barclays from interacting with students on campus, be this through careers fairs, stands on campus and branches, until they stop financing fossil fuel extraction. And now if we look, there is quite a clear precedent of institutional boycotts having a real impact. In the 80s and 90s in South Africa, we had a similar boycott of Barclays, which led to them withdrawing from apartheid South Africa. So yeah, that's my motion.
Amazing, thank you, Anna. So if we could just invite any initial questions from the panel for Anna. What is Barclays' market share in fossil fuels compared to other banks?
Well, yeah, as I said earlier, it's the biggest financer of fossil fuels in Europe, so $85 billion.
If there are no more questions. Yeah, Adam?
Thank you, Anna, for putting this forward. I think it's just so important that the university, stops having ties with Barclays, because they are also a huge supporter of the military industry, which not only is the biggest polluter in the world, but also contributes to a huge amount of human suffering. So I don't think that our tuition fees should be going to that at all. And I want to just about support this idea.
So if I could now invite some feedback from the reps, again, if you guys could just show your reactions for those that were generally in favour of the idea, and then if you had any particular feedback that was kind of different from the ideas that Anna's already raised. Got lots of thumbs up popping up. Lots of positive feedback from the schools. Just give people a chance to type if there's anything. Okay, so if there are no more questions, panel, are you ready to vote? Amazing, so we'll go to votes on this idea. So we've got 77% votes in favour, so that idea will pass. Amazing, so I'll pass over to Adam now for our final idea. Should the university cease relationships with any academic institutions that are complicit in breaking international law?
Thank you, Izzy. So I'm conscious that we've, been here for a while, so I'll just make this quick. Basically, what I think is building on our university's values and responsibility is that we, and I quote, we understand that what we do can have an impact on wider community, which is why we take our social, economic, and environmental responsibility seriously. If we do that, we should not be normalizing and having institutional relationships and academic relationships with academic institutions which are complicit in breaking, human rights, such as the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which actively participates in the annexation of Palestinian land in East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem. This is something that has been quoted by the UN. This is something that is generally understood by international law lawyers. And it is, in my opinion, our responsibility to put pressure on such institutions not to break international law and not to send our students to an accommodation which is a settlement, an illegal settlement under the Geneva Convention. And I think that our union should really work with our political engagement societies and LIPCOs to make sure that this university, surveys these ties with universities such as Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And if anyone has any more questions about this, I'm happy to answer. But I think it's quite clear that we should be supporting human rights and equal opportunities for all globally.
Great, thank you, Adam. So I'm just going to hand over to Monique, firstly, if that's okay, to give us some feedback from the faith societies about this motion.
Hi. So it's been quite mixed. So first off, SCM, which is one of the Christian societies, issued a statement in support, basically reiterating what Adam was saying, that the accommodation is illegal and the university is complicit in this. And then the Jewish Society disagreed with the statement, and it's quite a long statement, sorry, but I'll try to summarize it a bit. So they said that as a faith society, their priority is the connection of their members to their religion. And as most people know, Jerusalem is of massive significance to the Jewish faith, and Jerusalem is where the Hebrew University is located. So having the ability to live there even for a year is very important to a lot of Jewish people. They also say that it singles out Israel, which is the only Jewish state, and holds them to a much higher account than other countries. This is evident as there's no mention of Chinese universities, for example, despite many perceiving the Chinese regime to be oppressive, or any other country for that matter. And this singling out of Israel is clearly defined as anti-Semitism under the IHRA definition, which states that applying double standards by requiring of it a behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. It attacks, sorry for mispronunciation, IDC Hazliya, with no evidence or claims that it has any ties to the Israeli government. Furthermore, it does not involve itself in disputed territories. They also say that they seek to promote Israel engagement, which does not mean that they're pro or anti-Israel, but they simply seek to promote education surrounding the topic from a variety of viewpoints. And they feel that this motion passing would impede the ability of many of their members to be able to learn about Israel's culture and history. And then they also want to iterate that a lot of alumni and current students have done a year abroad there, and they found it to be a very fruitful experience.
Okay, I wasn't keeping notes of all the things that have been said. Thank you, Monique, for giving a voice to these concerns, because they are really important. And I would like to start with the claim that it's anti-Semitic. And I would just like to say, we did not, the name of the motion, the main idea of the motion is about human rights. It's not about Israel. It's not about the Israeli occupation. It's about human rights. And if you say that and if there's evidence that the Chinese universities have any ties to the government and in turn are complicit, because we target complicity, not identity. We want these institutions to stop being racist against Palestinian students. And there's a lot of evidence, and I couldn't possibly put all of the evidence into the idea because I just didn't have space. But if anyone would like to amend the motion and add any Chinese universities, I'm more than happy to do that. I'm against the oppression of Uyghurs and China, 100%. So that's about single out Israel. I'm not holding up Israel to no bigger standard than anyone else, than any other country. So that's just to say something about that. As for learning about Israeli culture, I would encourage anyone to learn about Israel. I would encourage everyone to learn about Palestine, about the oppression of human rights that is happening, that is going on in Palestine, which the Hebrew University of Jerusalem is complicit in. And again, I'm more than happy to provide more evidence on this if we have a whole report on this issue. I don't want to spend more time on this, but I feel like I've answered this to a really good extent, and I really appreciate the Christian movement for supporting this vital motion that will promote human rights and that will make sure that Palestinians are protected from racism and occupation.
So I've got Sarah, dance rep, has got some feedback as well that she'd like to put forward.
Sort of mixed opinions from the dance societies that I received. kind of echoing a little bit what Monique said, just some worries about the examples used and whether that's sort of focusing on Israel really particularly, and whether that's something that the university should get involved in, because obviously it's something that is happening in the world and is an important thing for obviously people to know about and discuss, but whether the university should kind of be seen as having a stance on it, because obviously there's students that are affected from both sides of the situation. So yeah, just whether it should be something that the union or LUU gets involved in.
Can I go ahead and answer that? All right. Basically, I think what we should also think about are the lives of the Palestinian students, some of which are at our university. Some Palestinian students are at our university and are members of our student community, and other Palestinians who do not get the opportunity to come. I was just actually speaking to one Palestinian student today who was not allowed to leave Gaza because of the blockade that it's been imposed on it. And this is something that the Hebrew University is complicit with, because they have separate programs for IDF soldiers, for the Israeli Defense Force soldiers. So I absolutely value the freedom of our students and of students within Hebrew University. But at the same time, I think it's really important to consider the impact this institution is having on Palestinian lives and the lives of Palestinian students.
So if I could just invite Alex to speak next. I think he's got something to say on behalf of JSOC.
Actually, I'll be talking on my personal behalf.
Oh, sorry.
You did a good job of speaking for JSOC. I'd like to start by saying I think this motion is quite frankly despicable. I could talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict till the cows come home. I think the most important issue to address here is the claim that it's against international law. So what Adam's referring to when he says the Geneva Convention is the Fourth Geneva Convention and Article 49 specifically, which states that an occupying power cannot move its own population into a disputed territory. Israel is not doing this, right? Israel hasn't actually actively moved its population. This law was meant to be in place, and what is in place to stop what happened during the Nazi era, where the Nazis actually moved their own population into disputed territory or occupied land. In this case, Israel is not actively moving its population. I'd also like to talk about Hebrew University. I do have a vested interest in the university, as my great aunt worked for many, many years as an English teacher at the university. The university was founded by Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, Martin Buber, and Chaim Weizmann. So some very, very famed and highly acclaimed people there. Apart from that, it's also got 15 Nobel Prize winners among its alumni, 2 field medalists, and 3 Turing Award winners. So I think the University of Leeds would be all the worse for severing ties with the Hebrew University. As for IDC, Adam claims that it had some sort of complicity with Gaza, or the Hebrew, with Gaza. I'm not really sure where he's coming from, but if you want me to tell you what's been going on in Gaza today, at 4 a.m. this morning, an Israeli soldier was killed. He had a rock thrown at his face and died. 10 hours later, in the West Bank, a terrorist attempted to stab a soldier at the checkpoint. As you can see, this conflict is.
Are we talking about the motion? Are we talking about circumstances that are happening in Israel and Palestine?
Sorry, what was that? Sorry, didn't hear.
I'm saying, are we talking about the motion? This is more a general thing, or are we talking about what is happening currently anywhere else in the world?
I think it's important to provide context, as you have tried to do in your summary of your motion. I'd also like to add that this kind of thing is called an academic boycott. So it's kind of under the umbrella term of the BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement. I'd also like to stress that the founder of BDS, Omar Barghouti, attended Tel Aviv University. So it seems that even within the BDS movement, an academic boycott is something viewed as very, very extreme. And as such, you can see that this is far from clear, this issue. And as such, how could you vote on it?
So we're running out of time on this idea. I've just got a couple of questions from the panel. So I'm just going to ask those questions. If you could try to focus your response as answers to those questions. So Sam asks, how would that affect researchers with ongoing research projects within these universities?
Yeah, so just an opportunity, just 1 minute to react what Alex was saying, because I think I have the right to say that. In general, I think, you know, what we should really focus on is to look at what the situation is in Palestine, Israel, and what the situation is for Palestinian students who are studying at the Hebrew University, which is the fact that they're being there's discrimination happening against them, and this is a fact which you can, you know, happily look up for yourself. And I think that, you know, really, really crucially, what we should think about are the lives of people living in East Jerusalem whose lives are affected by this occupation. And as far as Albert Einstein, by the way, he was opposed to Zionist militias and Zionism in general. You can read that in New York Times issue in the 40s. As for researchers, obviously, I think it's really important that we have academic freedom. And what would happen to researchers, I think this is more about the process rather than the merit of the idea. But I will say that, for example, research is happening at Manchester University with an institute called Raytheon, which is developing technology for drones that kill Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and that these drones are then sold as battle tested. So that.
So we've got a question from Lucy, one of the panelists. Are there any other academic institutions you could give as an example? But I suppose you've already kind of answered that already in your reference that this is kind of any institutions.
Also, I would encourage people to put, you know, these things up. I think that we should fight against oppression and fight for human rights globally. Again, this is not only about Palestinian human rights, it's about human rights in everywhere in the world. And if anyone has a suggestion, then please put it forward. And I think I've made it quite clear in the motion saying that there is a space for any other, you know, issue against human rights that we can address.
So we've got some feedback from Lucy on the panel. Is it realistic for the wording of the motion to be changed so that it does not specifically include Israeli universities, but universities that may be complicit in breaking international law?
I think as an alternative, I would suggest putting another example, which will, I think, be fair. And I think it's really important to illustrate theoretical or general statements with facts and examples. So I would say, yeah, add another example. Why not?
So if I could just ask if any of the panelists have any more questions or anything that you'd like clarifying. Alex, if you wanted to add something, if I could just ask that we really focus on the idea itself, because we've run out of time on this idea now, so we'd like to move to voting as quickly as possible.
Yeah, happy to. Just one quick thing. I think I find it quite interesting, and I hope everyone else does too, that with the wording of the actual motion itself, as I've explained with Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, those Israeli universities wouldn't come under it because no international law has been broken. And I'll happily have a discussion with anyone that would like to speak to me about it.
So Adam, if we could just have something
5
brief
seconds
from you.
really
Yeah,
quickly.
that's okay. I just.
Yeah, thank you, Izzy. Really appreciate that. Really, quite clearly, if you read into international law, if you read into UN General Assembly resolutions, you will find that this is occupation under Fourth Geneva Convention. And there's an international court investigation happening right now, which has been approved by the court, and it will find out these war crimes. So yes, this is occupation, and yes, these are war crimes.
So if I could just ask the panel if you guys have any more questions.
Izzy, someone's asked if I can expand on my point. Would you like me to?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, so I've got something written down here. So there's the claim that Israeli presence in the West Bank is against international law and mentions the Fourth Geneva Convention by name. It's obvious that it hasn't been read or understood fully in this motion. The specific article he was referring to was Article 49 that states, and this is direct quotes, individual or mass forcible transfers as well as deportations of protected persons from occupied territory to the territory of the occupying power or to that of any other country, occupied or not, are prohibited regardless of their motive. This means that the occupying force, in this case you might argue Israel, cannot deport or transfer its own population, not the Palestinians. It was written in the context of Nazi Germany forcibly deporting its citizens into areas of land in order to claim them. The article was written to protect the German people from being forcibly moved by their government into other areas of land. Therefore, Article 49 does not apply to the Palestinians, but to the Israeli population from the Israeli government. If the Israeli government forcibly moved its own population into the West Bank, that might constitute a violation of international law. However, this has never been done. The only time Israel has moved its population by force was when it removed all Jews from Gaza and gave it to the Palestinians. Furthermore, the status of the West Bank, I would argue, would be disputed territory, as the land was never Palestinian in the first place, and therefore could not fit the definition of occupied. If it's disputed territory and not an occupied territory, then the Fourth Geneva Convention wouldn't even apply. Thank you.
Okay, so if we could just have a quick concluding point from Adam, and then I think the panelists are all ready to vote, so we'll move to that shortly.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this and for staying with us. I think it's really important that we pass this motion because Alex has not addressed one thing, which is the oppression of the Palestinian people and the suffering of the Palestinian people. We can go into semantics of international law, and this will be decided by the International Court of Justice. But the lives of Palestinians in Palestine and in Israel are at stake here, and these institutions are complicit in the oppression, and that's what we have to do. We have to stand by our responsibilities to global justice and to our values, and withdraw from any relationships with any institutions in the world that break international law and oppress human rights. Thank you so much.
Okay, so if all of the panel are ready, we'll move to voting on this idea. If you guys could just give me some reactions to confirm that you're ready to vote. Great, thanks everyone. So we'll go to voting on this idea. So if everyone's back, then hopefully we will be able to show the result from that idea. So we haven't got a majority either way for this idea, so it will be passed to campus-wide referendum. Great, so that's all the ideas we've got this evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for being so patient with this digital format. Yeah, it's all, I think, run very smoothly, all things considered. The idea holders, you've all done such a good job, because I know it's such a different thing speaking to people over video than kind of speaking to people face to face. But thank you all so much for giving up your evening and making this possible. And thank you all from me as well, because this is my last forum and I love doing this. And I've learned so much from all of the idea holders, all of the reps. And you'll see me next year. I'm going to be on the exec, which is really exciting, which I wouldn't have done if I hadn't come to forums, so they're really great. In case anyone missed it, if this evening has inspired you to put forward any ideas of your own, then you can submit your idea on the representation section of the LUU website, or you can send Mike an email and organise a meeting with him to chat about putting an idea forward. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. If you're a panelist, you should have an email from Mike. If you could just fill that in, and then he'll tell you how to go about getting your reward for the evening.